Hi, welcome to the Wellbeing Show. I almost missed the beginning of the show because I was caught up in an interesting chat with Bethany, which we're going to continue as though you weren't here. But anyway, it's a live show, as you know, if you've watched this regularly by now. You can get in touch with us on any of the platforms that we are, what are they called? Simulcasting? Is that right? I'm an old man. I don't know.
I don't know.
I think so. I think that's what my marketing team calls it. We're simulcasting or broadcasting on various platforms simultaneously is how I say it. But then I'm a dinosaur old fart, so I tend to take a long-winded way of saying everything. But we're on Facebook Live, YouTube and Twitter, so do join us, or you can send me a WhatsApp on +44 7506 319 745. That's enough of that. Here we are with Bethany, who we've written novels together via
we have in a very short time.
a fellow HuffPosty contributor. Hello, Bethany. You're joining us from I was just
Chicago,
Glasgow, because that's the first really cold place I could think of. But no, it's Chicago, isn't it?
Yes.
Welcome. What time is it over there?
It's 3 o'clock. 3 o'clock in the afternoon.
Great. And is it the Windy City, Chicago? Is that right?
It is. It's the Windy City. And interestingly, a little tidbit, that it was named the Windy City because of politicians who give a lot of wind when they talk and no fluff. But it's actually very windy as well, i.e. like in the, wind, nature's wind. But it's a windy city in both ways.
Yeah, and you confused me in our chat before the show by saying you were out at the beach today, and I was like, maybe my geography is really bad. I didn't realise Chicago was on the coast. And you explained to me it's not the coast, is it?
That's right. No, Lake Michigan, but it's so big that it feels like an ocean, but it's not salt water. So I love it. It's great.
Great. Yeah, beautiful. Well, it's really good to have you on and sort of going to learn something about what you do. You're a doctor with a PhD or PsyD?
A PsyD. I have a PsyD.
And but not a medical doctor, you're a doctor of psychology and psychological therapies, just so that people know. A real doctor, as some people say. You've got an actual doctorate rather than a medical doctor, which doesn't require, but that's an old argument that's been going on. You're a music therapist.
I am, yes.
And a mum.
That I am as well, yes.
Yeah, and so we're going to explore all of those, I think. I suppose first place to start would be, how has it been the last year for you and your family? How have you managed and coped through this really bizarre event?
I know, this time in history, like never before, right? When it first started, I think everybody was in shock. The family was in shock. My partner was home. The kids were home all the time. And it was kind of, I actually subscribed to the Disney Channel. Like, what are we going to do? Let's get Disney.
So did I.
Did you? I love
it. My boy was so Disney. Happy. He's like, we got Disney. I said, oh, well, yeah.
That's right. So were my kids. They're like, whoa. So there was a few things that I didn't ever think I would do that I did. And it was, it's been a year. It's been a year of ups and downs. My children they only went back to school in March. So they've been in school for just a few weeks. But they've been home the whole time. Everybody's trying to work. Everybody's trying to do what they need to do. My partner's been home as well this entire time. So it's just kind of like our little lot and our little house. And we go out, and it's been tough. It has been very tough mentally on me. My children have had ups and downs. I think kids are obviously more resilient, but the pandemic has been very difficult on children for various reasons, and I believe that often it's, the poor kids, and there's these extremes that we think about with kids. And I know that there are children who are home who the parents, it's just too much, and they're getting abused, and the abuse isn't getting reported because they're not at school. You know what I mean? So that is the worst case that's happened from the pandemic. The flip side to that is that I know children who had been bullied in school, and school was actually an uncomfortable place for them. And so they've had a whole year of reprise. They've had a year of building confidence, of building skills, of making new friends, of just not having that stress of going to school every day, the anxiety of that. So, it's been ups and downs. I've had moments where I did have a very dark moment for a couple of weeks, and I thought, oh my gosh, I think I'm becoming depressed, like clinically depressed. And I had a check-in with my partner and my best friend, and I just said, this is what I'm feeling. I don't even want to cook anymore because I love cooking. And it's just everybody, I believe we all just figured out we had more in us than we thought we did. And every time we thought we didn't have anything else to give, you just find it. Every parent does. You just find it. And so it's been a year where I think we've come together. We've learned things. We've grown in ways that I didn't think that we would. And
or didn't think you wanted to. I shouldn't imagine.
Wanted, yeah, right. It's a better way to say it. I didn't think I was ready for that.
I've learned enough now, Live. Thanks very much. I've learned the lesson. Could you stop?
Right, exactly. It's really brought our community together too, though. I mean, I live in Chicago, and I believe when you think about Chicago, it's all guns and gangsters, and we have this image. And I live in a very diverse neighborhood in the North Side. The whole neighborhood came together. We supported one another. My children and I painted over 300 rocks, and we did this because as a psychologist, and also we're home. What are we going to do? We're home for a whole year. The kids aren't in school. So my background's creative arts therapy, and I know that we're going to talk about that in a little bit. But my mind is just, how can we connect to everybody in our community? So I thought, let's make some rocks. So we did different series. So we had strength rocks where we painted them all one color with words like love, hope, guidance, happiness. And then we had a series where they were glitter rocks. And when we did one series of that, because I got glitter in my eye and it hurt, I said, we're not doing glitter anymore. We're done with glitter. We're totally done. Yeah.
The loving, caring mother, forget it. That hurt too much.
Yeah. I'm over it. I think any parent who does anything with glitter, they all are kind of going, yeah, I get it. I get the glitter. Pet rocks. And we always wrote a poem and we'd put them on our fence. And then when people walked by, the kids could stand and they would watch people take the rocks. And they would say, oh, Mom, my bee, somebody's going to get a rock. And then we'd walk around our neighborhood, and we have a lot of fairy gardens. I don't know why Chicago has fairy gardens, but a lot of people have little gardens for fairies in their yard. And we would find the kids would find their rocks in other people's yards. I mean, that's magical for a 6 and 7 year old, Yeah, and yeah, so we did that. I did nightly sing-alongs, and my kids, they kind of got over this, but I'd already committed, so I couldn't back out. So here we go. We're 100 days in. So I did this for 100 days straight, and I blasted music from my front porch. And I sent out an email to all my neighbors, and I said, these are the 3 songs we're doing tonight. All of them are uplifting, hopefully. Sometimes they would reflect what was happening in politics, right? What was going on in the country. And people would line the streets, social distanced, and rain or shine, they came out, and it was amazing. And we met neighbors we didn't know. And my wife jokingly would call me Eva Perón, please, not even, but because I'm standing on the porch singing and shouting.
Eva Perón didn't end happily. I'm sure we can think of something happier than Eva Perón.
Okay, good. I'll have to tell her that, don't cry for me, Argentina. Yeah. But all the neighbors would bring me things, like the family, because they felt supported and connected. And so in an effort to teach not only my children, learned a lesson about giving back. The community was brought together. My neighbor next to me, he's the old mayor of Milwaukee, and he would come out every night and blow the bugle that, da 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 da, and call the neighbors at 5 o'clock, and then we'd all sing, and then we'd wave and go back inside, and we did it for a full 100 days straight. It was amazing. Wow.
I hope you did some filming of that and could share it.
I do. I will. I have some TikToks I can send to you.
Do, please, and we'll put it out with this broadcast so people can see it. What a fantastic thing to do. And this before the sort of naysayers jump in and start sort of picking that apart, there's some really important psychological things that you're doing there in terms of dealing with trauma, and particularly in times when our standard resilience models are challenged. So our standard resilience models are based upon social contact. That's it. And generally in therapy, that's what we do, is we teach people how to make better connections with other people so that they feel a lot stronger and a lot better. I mean, that's ultimately what it comes down to. But the pandemic took that away from us and changed it in many ways, which is why I think you were saying earlier on about you sort of discovered strengths you didn't know you had. And we did. We did. If you'd have told me 5 years ago that people are going to survive and grow and flower in a situation where you take away most of their social support, I'd have probably laughed at you.
Yeah,
That's
absolutely.
ridiculous. That's ridiculous. Don't be stupid. That's not possible psychologically. But people did. And I think some of the things that you're doing is describing some of the processes. So one, and we might as well go into that conversation now, but one is creativity is the opposite of trauma.
Yes.
Literally, in terms of psychologically and neurologically how it operates. Two, the sort of positive, seeing the bigger meaning. There's a greater meaning to this. Playfulness with your children and the rocks, and then finding ways that you can connect, and not living in the past, but living in the here and now. Those were the themes I picked up from what you just described. Does that sound about right?
Absolutely. And that was 100% one of some of the reasons that we did it.
Yeah. So let's talk about creativity. You're a music therapist. I didn't tell you this, but I'm a drama therapist by my training as well. So my ground is in the arts and the arts therapies. So what brought you into music therapy? What was the attraction for you? What was the sort of what's that story, I guess?
What brought me in? Music. I had a very traumatic childhood, early beginnings, and I have always loved music, and music was a way for me to escape as a child, especially musicals. I'm all about musicals. And I also believed it taught me empathy and understanding of other people's struggles through the music. So I think I was 12, and I used to volunteer at nursing homes and would go in and play my violin, scratch, scratch, squeak, squeak, for everybody. They loved it. I'm not sure they could hear it. That's okay. And I heard a woman named Euphoria Lane, and she's a pretty big music therapist, and she's working at the Cleveland Clinic here in the States. And I had never heard of this field or career. And I was like, what? I love people. I love making people feel better. I love helping people. I've always been, the helper. And music just moves me in a way that I can't even express. It just gets in my body, and I love it. And I was at music therapy. This is it. It helps people through music. What better degree? And so when I was 12, I was just like, I'm going to get a music therapy degree, and I'm going to help people with music. And so I got a couple degrees in it.
So to get therapeutic benefit from music, does it need to be music therapy, or can it just be music?
No, it can totally be music. I've been offering a lot of mental health tips throughout this pandemic for parents, for anybody, just a way to escape. And the amazing thing about music is when you listen to it just on your own, if you were on fMRI or a scan, your entire brain's lit up. And so areas of the brain that might not be getting enough blood flow or might be understimulated has an opportunity to just get a little tickle, a little massage here, a little massage there. And so I feel
why is that important?
Because when the neuro firings in your brain are only going in certain directions all the time because things aren't changing, you're doing the same thing day in, day out. You think about the Grand Canyon, that was just a river at one point, and because it just kept going in the same way, it got really deep. And so we can become entrenched in our negative thoughts, our negative actions, our behaviors. And if you're looking at cognitive behavior therapy, your thoughts, your feelings, and your behaviors are all connected. So if you switch one of those, the other two will automatically switch. I think, in depressive, working with people with chronic depression, often people will say, or therapists say, act like you're not depressed, get out of bed, take a shower, do the things. And sometimes that can help motivate over the hump of doing things. So the reason it's important that the brain is encompassed with light and activity when you are listening to it, it is waking up those pathways that maybe we can start making changes in our life, or we can do something differently, that we don't automatically always think this thought that goes straight to here, that goes straight to there. So,
and it's also, there's been quite a bit of emerging research from the pandemic showing, so sort of neurological research showing that people are displaying symptoms of depression, not necessarily having all of them, but they're having a sort of cognitive and neurological decline for exactly the same reason that you say, because our lives have become so prescribed.
Yes.
So this
very narrow, mundane,
dropped, and it's causing quite significant sort of cognitive issues for people in terms of memory, in terms of being able to socialize, in terms of being able to form sentences, etc., as though they were ill, but they're not, and it's just simply this thing. So music in and of itself can reverse that.
Yes, absolutely. you can listen, I would say you can listen to music you love, and obviously a song comes on that you haven't heard from a time in your life, it will take you back there immediately. That's the cool thing. So I think of music also as time travel. But when you're listening to music for, and it can get you out of the, so before I move on, time travel in the sense that we can sit here, we can feel those emotions again. So play a song that brings you up when you're not at your best, or that you're feeling down, that you can reconnect to some of that old excitement. And it works because it taps into the memories where the banks are stored.
And musical appreciation starts in utero, doesn't it? You can hear and recognize music when you're in the womb. Do you know what sort of gestation period it is? I can't remember from my training.
I don't know if
don't worry about it.
Obviously, I don't know. Sorry, I can't. I don't want to guess.
Third trimester, anyway. I can't imagine it happens before that. But there's been some pretty good studies showing that in utero there's responses to music similar to the ones that we have when we're born, and also that the child after born, if you play certain types of sounds and music to them, they remember them. But also it has that same neurological impact in terms of lighting up the brain. I suppose the way I think about it is because I'm doing a lot of exercise at the moment to get over my pandemic flab, is I think about it like in the gym. If you go to the gym and you only exercise your right arm with the curls, you'll have a really strong right arm, but the rest of you will just fall apart. And that's a bit like your brain, the idea that we have to sort of train the brain. Are there other, if you can remember, specific things that music does neurologically and emotionally?
Sure. So the ISO principle is it's a principle based on a law of physics. And this law of physics, it says that if there are two grandfather clocks in a room and the pendulums are swinging at different times, that over time they will sync. Okay. This principle applied in music means that, and I think when parents reflect on what I'm about to say, they'll go, yeah. So a parent's style of music is different from an adolescent's, right? If we think physiologically what's happening inside the adolescent's body versus the adult body, there's puberty, there's growth spurts, there's all these changes that create cacophony within them. So they like this often loud music, pounding music. And so what you want to do with music in the sense of you want to match the energy that the person's feeling. So how can music help the body? So let's say you're anxious and you want to chill out. What music does is it syncs itself. The body syncs to the rhythm of the music. It just does that automatically. Our heart's beat in a rhythm, everything's in rhythm. So let's say you're anxious. You don't want to put on a slow song because your anxiety looks like this and that slow song looks like this. And it's just going to irritate you even more. So you want to put on a song that matches that energy level so that when you have that sync, your body has this, your body feels heard, it feels regulated. Then what you do is the next two songs after that, you're going to tone it down a step. The next song's not going to be quite so intense. It's going to be a slower rhythm. And then maybe the third song's even less than. And so that's a way for music to help you bring down your heart rate, help with breathing, calm. And you can also use it the other way to ramp up. And people do it all the time for exercise, right? I don't want to go exercise. And they put on music and then they're off.
It's also, it's really interesting. I think the two art forms that have these almost autonomic emotional reactions are the visual arts, particularly fine art, and music. So music can instantly change an emotional response in a human. And actually in animals as well. I've seen it happen in animals, that they respond almost immediately to shifts in music. And the same thing can happen with visual arts. I remember going to see a Matisse retrospective at an art gallery here in London. Yeah, I know. It's first time I've seen Matisse in the flesh, as it were. I've seen all the prints and stuff like that, the Blue Ladies, and but I actually saw the prints, the cutouts for the first time ever. It's extraordinary. Wow. But I remember it was a really interesting experience. I walked into one of the rooms and started crying and felt a lot of sadness. I had at that point no idea why. And it's interesting because Matisse is thought of as one of the preeminent emotional artists, that he evokes emotional responses. That's his gig, if you like.
His thing, yeah.
Famous for. And so I had this emotional response, and I was like, why am I feeling sad? And why am I crying? Because I'm a psychologist, so I tend to notice my feelings and correspond with myself about them rather tediously.
Right. I think we all do that. We have our little chats in our head.
That's a classic. And then I went and read the plaque explaining what this collection of work was about, and it was all the last pieces of work he'd done when he knew he was dying. And so he'd somehow captured the emotional experience of his own death and the grief he felt, and that resonated with me. Music does that as well. So if I think of like music that is thinking about that time travel thing, music that's very important. One thing is if I think about like the band Queen and Live Aid and that experience, and there's a whole series of experiences and memories that come from that. It's like walking down my street as a teenager with the Live Aid music all coming out at the same time from everybody's house. Everybody was listening to it, and then Queen came on, and we just went absolutely bonkers in the UK. And so things like that.
They are amazing. I love Queen. So
yeah. It was their sort of comeback gig, and so I think we've all got that. These experiences and memories that are very powerful, and it may be new to some people that music therapy exists, but actually there's a lot of research evidence backing it up.
There is a lot of research, yes.
Yeah.
And there's different approaches to music therapy too, even within it. So, the field of psychology, you've got cognitive behavior therapy, person-centered, Freudian music therapy. They have neurologic music therapy that looks mostly at and works a lot with individuals who've had strokes or aphasia, speech. They use music for speech because I think the King's Speech told it, that movie explained it. But if somebody has a stutter or they had a stroke and they're unable to speak, if you sing the sentence again, because the entire brain provides the structure, the music's providing the structure. And so often I will have individuals sing sentences. Can you bring me coffee? They can't say, can you bring me coffee, but they can sing it. And so it's a way to rebuild those pathways that were disrupted by stroke, by whatever happened. And so
singing is how I learned sign language, oddly enough. So,
interesting.
Because I worked in theatre before training as a therapist, and so I learned sign language through the work in theatre. But the sign language coach always gave us songs to learn first. And
it makes
it much easier to learn the language through songs. So again, it's that whole person approach, I suppose, that whole body approach.
Yes.
And a sort of acquisition of new skills. Thinking about the relationship, because we started off, I mentioned that creativity is the opposite of trauma, and you nodded vigorously away.
I think my head fell off.
Yeah, quite. So let's chat a bit about that. Do you mind, because I grew up in a lot of trauma, I'm comfortable to talk about it. I don't know if you are or not. But
yeah, I can talk about it.
So, I mean, I grew up in a sort of alcoholic, violent family, or immigrant family. My father, very dangerous, sort of scary man, and etc. Et both my parents did the best they could, to be honest. I mean, they weren't evil people, but they just had inherited bad habits from their parents, etc. etc. It's that. So I grew up, highly traumatized. I'm lucky I got a lot of help for it, so I'm okay these days, I think. Maybe. We have to ask other people whether I'm okay or not. But
right, we'll talk about that later, okay?
I'll give you a 10. You can say I am.
Right.
What was your experience, if you don't mind talking about it?
Yeah, sure. And interestingly, the majority of the trauma that happened for me was before I was even a year old. So I was born, and my bio mom didn't really want me. She was, from what I hear, she was 18. Bio dad denied that he was dad. And this was, of course, before Maury Povich and all his paternity, like, who's the daddy? Let's find out kind of stuff. So, and then I was with my biological grandmother, biological aunt. I was placed in 7 different foster homes.
Wow.
I was adopted once and returned. I mean, who returns a baby? Oh my God. I must have not been good. Okay. So I was returned.
No, you were perfect. That's so bizarre.
Thank you. Yeah, right. Thank you. I thank you. And then my parents got me, they came to collect me at 9 months, and officially the adoption was official at a year. But my mom said when she came to collect me, I was at another foster home, and I was, the door was open. There was a front porch. There was a cow literally like right outside. And I was in a playpen just sitting there, and I had earwax dripping out of my ears and flies all over my body.
Oh.
And they didn't know if the red marks were fly bites or chicken pox. for a long time. They weren't chicken pox because I ended up having to get the vaccine when I was older.
Right.
And my mom said, I didn't smile for years. Well, not for years, for a long time. And I had issues with women caregivers because apparently they had been primarily the ones that had neglected and abused me. So like I would have a meltdown in the store when I was like 2, and my mom would just randomly find any dude, pick me up and hand me to him, and I would just stop. She's like, could you just hold this kid for a second? Let me check out, So, it was just very interesting. And obviously because of that background, I had a lot of attachment issues. I still probably do have attachment issues because I just feel like a rolling stone, and we're all out for ourselves kind of thing, but as a community. And growing up, my parents, my dad, he's since passed away. He was an awesome dad. I think the undiagnosed Asperger's made it difficult for him to hold a job. And it also made it difficult for him to have deep, meaningful relationships with friends and to develop those types of things. But I loved him and he loved me. And we were and the awesome thing about it was because I just had so much trauma to undo, and I was very hyper, and like, he just didn't care. He was like happy to let me be me and didn't try to force social norms on me, right? Like, don't act like this when you're here. Don't do this when you're here. He was just like, look how happy and fun she is. I love her. So there was, there's sides to every sword. So there was that side to it. And, my mom did the best that she could with what she knew at the time. She came from a family where if you smarted off, you might have gotten spanked, or the belt or the spoon or the switch, whatever everybody calls it, something. And so there's a little bit of that trying to curtail me growing up. And just, I think it was more, it's really hard to parent children in general. And I believe temperament is a large factor into who we are. And that means sometimes parents have their own child and they can kind of get it, or on the same bent, the parents and the child fight because they're very similar. But my mom was just like, I don't know what this Tasmanian devil is. She's had trauma. She would just let me play for hours in the woods by myself. So a lot of it was when I was younger, and then I believe that we can have trauma without necessarily having something specifically done to us, in the sense that a societal type of like, you have to be this way, or society says you're not okay. And then somebody else says you have to be that, or you have to fit in these holes and these fences. And so since I was born, I just have fought fences. Frank Sinatra, don't fence me in, man. And I've been fortunate that I'm either likable enough, or people are concerned that they haven't like squashed me so much that my spirit has died. But I know that there are children out there who get their entire spirit gets squashed, so that's kind of the trauma that I'm coming from.
Sure. And also, I think people don't know this, but severe neglect in the first 2 years is very, very significant neurologically. The type of brain scans I'm talking about, where there's big holes in the frontal lobe. So, literally. So it's sort of disturbing. I've worked a lot with kids who are very severely neglected, and they presented as traumatized. And mostly they presented as traumatized because the neurological development hadn't happened.
It wasn't there, that's right.
And so there was no way the frontal lobes could manage the sort of midbrain and the amygdala and all that sort of stuff, as you know.
That's right.
Clearly that level of neglect didn't happen to you, because you would have been in an institution right now. But
they got me out good enough, I guess.
Well, somehow you survived. Maybe it's the cow. Who knows?
It could have been my friendly cow, the friendly cow on the front porch.
Yeah, that's sort of, it's almost, we're joking about it, but it's almost unbelievable that could happen to a baby in the care of a state as well at the same time. And it makes me think of that. Do you remember all those Romanian babies in the?
I was just going to bring up that those studies that they're still having, that you just can't. It was Harlow's with the monkeys. The monkeys.
That's research done in the US.
Yeah, all that. But it is
people who don't know about that, attachment theory is one of the few psychodynamic or psychoanalytic theories that has any sort of evidence base. The rest of it is maybe it works, maybe it doesn't.
Right.
But attachment theory was evidenced in America, wasn't it, with the experiments on the monkeys? So they had these baby monkeys, And they had two sets of them. One set had a feeding object in their cage, which had some fur wrapped around it, and the other, that's right, and they didn't have any cloth or fur around the feeding object.
Yeah.
Carry on. Sorry.
Oh, that's okay. I was just going to say they had both in the same area. So the monkey had two parents. Yeah. One was very cold and steel, but that had the food, and then the other one was very cuddly but had no food.
That's right.
Like, and that's
the thing. Yeah.
Yeah. And so that they did, because, you know, back in the day, even there's still people now that says if you feed a baby and change their nappy, that they'll survive. And what this research showed was that it's not about feeding. It's actually about the emotional, the connection, the cuddle, that the monkey would feed and then quickly go back to the other mother. Or the wire monkey. And it was a huge shift in the thought process for psychologists, for attachment theory, for how we even look at children. You know, children were seen and not heard. They were, you know, seen as objects for such a long time, and still are in many areas.
And then, if I remember rightly, part of the experiment was that there was a group of monkeys didn't have the comforting object. And so both sets of monkeys were frightened in their cage, and one set would feed and then go and get sort of support from their teddy bear, as it were. And then the other set would feed for a while, and then they'd give up after a while because they had nothing to comfort them. So they just sort of collapsed into depression. And then they released these monkeys into the group. And the ones that had the object, the sort of teddy bear object, were fine. They socialized. A bit of
they could self-regulate.
They were okay, but the other didn't. I mean, they just sort of didn't socialize, were traumatized, etc., etc. So, it's very important studies, and sort of in terms of attachment, which you talked about. Attachment is this idea, which is now well researched, that certain types of physical interactions between primates, in particular humans, is what we're talking about here, but other animals do as well. But certain types of physical interactions produce a neurological growth, a specific type of neurological growth that is important in terms of formation of a sense of self, but also formation of the skills to interrelate,
communication, society, connect.
That's right, all of those things.
Absolutely.
And if those are interrupted, it can be quite difficult. But, and this is the hope, isn't it? We remain what's called neuroplastic. That's
right. Yep.
The whole of our lives. And so we can change that. We can repair that, can't we?
That's absolutely right. And you know, the really cool thing about all the studies that we've been doing is that you can repair trauma. So when we're born, we take the trauma on the genes from our parents and their parents.
Yeah, I mean, and their parents. That's right. Yeah.
It's amazing. And so, you know, I work really hard to undo my trauma, and then I'm wondering how my children will undo the trauma that they just inherited because of what it was. But
we can
change your DNA.
We can make children trauma resilient, can't we?
That's right. Absolutely.
Let's talk a bit about this. Tell me something about that, because like in my experience of my life, I decided, I don't know how I decided it, but at some point I decided it's stopping here. I'm not passing this on. I'm going to change myself enough. I'm going to do the work enough so that I don't sort of act out the same patterns. I understood that patterns had been acted out on me, and I had the risk of doing them. So I made that decision. But we can then change the potential outcomes for our own children, can't we? So could you talk about that a little bit? Is that okay? I don't want to put you on the spot, but
yeah, sure. Talking about like how am I doing that with my kids personally, like switching that? Okay.
Yeah, that and also how you might work with other parents and what sort of
sure
advice you might give them. Is that okay, Bethany? I really don't want to put you on the spot, but
that's okay. I'll talk a little bit about it because I believe that as parents,
just so that people know, I'm checking with Bethany because I happen to know that she has a neurological disorder that sometimes it makes it difficult to remember things. And so if you need to go, I mean, because of my trauma background, I have memory issues. And, and sometimes I need to check things on the internet and stuff like that because my brain just goes blank and stuff like that. So that's, folks, that's why I'm checking.
I appreciate
that you're okay, Bethany, to sort of carry on.
Yeah, for sure. And so people know, because I would automatically go, what does she have? What's going on? I have ADHD and dyslexia, which makes it difficult to store information. Sometimes remember who wrote what. You remember little bits and pieces.
I just want to reflect on that because the image we have of somebody with the neurological the neurodiversity that you have, Bethany, is of somebody who certainly can't get to a doctor, or wouldn't imagine them as Dr. Bethany, because they fail at school, surely.
Yeah, school was hard. School was hard for me in some ways. And because of the dyslexia, give me a true or false question, or a question with a double negative, or, oh, I can't do those tests. It's very difficult. But I guess I just kept going.
And the ADHD as well, because particularly with young women, because they are underdiagnosed in terms of ADHD, and often don't get the diagnosis till later, have all the same behavioural problems, and same issues at school. I just want to point this out because you are a remarkable person.
Thank you.
Maybe that was abandoned in the first of life. That was brought up by cows.
Right. Bring it up by cows and flies. You're like, wow, this one's she's a real treat, this one.
And then all the other stuff, and then the attachment and the trauma and the neurodiversity. You're a pretty much a poster child now for overcoming life's adversities, aren't you?
Thank you. I'm ready for my close-up, Mr. DeMille.
That's right, but it's like it's quite extraordinary. I just want to point out, because it is extraordinary, actually, Bethany, that what you've overcome and what you've achieved. So on to thinking about these types of interventions and strategies. Like I say, it's a lot of parents that I work with. They say, I'm worried what I've given my kids, like parents who are addicts in recovery and stuff like that, and they're worried about transmission of these issues. So how might you reassure them? What sort of advice?
What I would say to people, and what I tell everybody, is that when there are tears in a relationship, you can always repair it.
Yeah.
And there's nothing more powerful that a parent can do than to show vulnerability to their children.
Yeah.
I grew up thinking you had to be perfect when you were adult. There was like perfection. You couldn't ever mess up. And this idea that that's what we have to go for is just, it is a false ideological goal to give our kids. I think it's unfair. So I have been honest and open with my children about stuff that's happened to me. Sometimes when I get triggered, as all parents do, I overreact, I yell. Maybe I, did something I didn't, later look back and thought that was just, I was not in my right brain. I wasn't in the front of my brain. I was in the back of my brain and not really thinking. And I talk to my kids, they know about my childhood experiences. They know that, what happened to me growing up. And I say to them, I'm trying to do better. And I want to do better. And just being able to say to your kids, we're changing the story. We're changing the narrative. Grandma and grandpa used to do this to me. I don't like it, so I'm trying to change it for you. But sometimes things just pop up, right? Old patterns pop up. And I think as adults, we grow up and we go, I'm not going to have that anymore, or I'm an adult now, I don't have that issue. But if you don't heal from that trauma as a child, and you've only been modeled one way of how to relate to somebody, or you have this idea of how children should be, all the cognitive behavior should, the distortions that we have, it makes it really hard to parent. And
what do you think about this idea? Some people come up with this idea that what they should do is they should shield their children if they've had any problems or trauma themselves. It's, I'm sort of, let's assume that we all understand age appropriate. So
right, yeah, age appropriate.
We're not talking about emotional sort of incest or anything like that. But what do you think about this idea of shielding children?
Age appropriate, I don't think you should shield children. Yeah. I think children have the capacity to know what's going on. And the interesting thing about kids is they feel the energy long before they have the frontal lobe and ability to really cognitively understand. So if you can give them little words, little bits of understanding, that really helps. And I guess the example that I'll give is I've worked a lot with impoverished communities, low social economic status, and minority groups. And I can't tell you how many times I was this is way before I had children, that parents are talking to their 2, 3, 4-year-olds about, you don't run from the police, you don't do this when you see somebody, you don't take a gun out for this. And I always like, if parents have to talk to their children about how to be safe, I have to talk to my young kids about why, or what the differences is, or how their friends of color might be treated differently than them. And they get it on a level that is what they get. And I'll send you, I do TikTok, and I'll send you another one. But this past summer, my children and I were reading books about Harriet Tubman. We're reading about colonialism, slavery in the States, obviously age appropriate books. And my daughter just one day was drawing a picture, and I was just like, what is that? Who is that? And she goes, oh, it's Harriet Tubman. And I said, oh, that's cool. Like, she's like, look, there she is, her satchel. She freed a lot of people. She's pretty cool, Ma. And so they get it. And so to shield a child makes, the other thing about shielding is, and I don't know if you agree with this, but it tends to then it has this negative connotation of what's behind the shield. If you're shielding me, protecting me, then what behind it must be scary. It must be damaging. It must be something that I can't handle. And then the curiosity or the whatever it is becomes
I think
more.
shielding is in the same line of behaviors as avoidance, and avoidance is a bad idea. Shielding is a bad idea. And also, I mean, I think we have some pathological responses to trauma, such as depersonalization, derealization, which are forms of shielding. Numbing out is a form of shielding. I can't think of much positive about shielding, apart from if you're in an immediate risk.
A crisis. I was going to say if you're in crisis, maybe.
Yeah, you may want to stop something, and you may want to stop a child from seeing or hearing certain things. So certainly I think shielding a child from a violent movie is a good idea.
Absolutely.
I've made the mistake with my own boy of putting on adult content, and he's genuinely upset, and I'm like, oh my God, how did I do that? And because he just can't cope with it, They
don't know how to process it. Yeah.
No, not at all. What he sees is somebody killing somebody, and it's not a film; it's real, and he's really upset, So that type of shielding, I think, is absolutely appropriate. In terms of shielding from yourself, I mean, I think it's probably more your own defense if you go that way, because you haven't come to terms with yourself.
I was going to say you haven't owned it, because when you own your trauma, when you own your past, it becomes, it's no longer a burden. You're happy to share it. You're happy to say, look, I've overcome. Look, you can too. And it's more of a call to community. It's a call to everybody to say, you can do this. You're not alone. It's this idea that we're suffering alone.
I think it's about inheritance as well, in history. And I think it's a bit Pollyanna only to tell children all the sort of Disney versions of our history. It's a bit silly. It's not real.
Absolutely.
And I think our kids need to be armed with appropriate information to make appropriate choices as adults. So I think it's really important that, that I share with my boy. I mean, there's not a genetic thing, but there's a really odd connection here, which isn't genetic. But I'm in recovery from addiction, and I think that's really important to share with my boy, to understand that, so he can make risk assessments of his own growing up about his behavior.
Absolutely.
And it just so happens that his birth father does as well, so there is a genetic connection. Oddly enough. So, and sort of, if I'd been armed by information like that when I was a teenager, of, somebody had explained to me, your dad's an alcoholic and there's a 40% increased risk to you because of that, and who knows what decisions I would have made. So I think it's really important to be upfront with kids, but in a way that isn't assuming
too much.
Age
appropriate.
That's right. It's all of that sort of stuff. So I'm not a great fan of shielding. I just wondered what you think. I'm a great believer in some of the insights that Shakespeare made in his plays, and he was very clear of sort of the truth will out. And so I think we've got a choice with our kids. We either find a way of telling them the truth so that they can then make decisions about that, or they'll act out unconsciously on it.
Absolutely.
And usually end up in a disastrous place because of that. So,
I 100% agree.
Yeah.
And the interesting thing is, often when children are, I don't want to say out of control, but children who don't, fit the nice little, they do whatever. When kids are teenagers, 16, 17, I have a lot of parents who I work with who say, well, she doesn't listen to me. I can't, she goes out all the time and she's just threatened that she's going to move out at 16 and this and that. And then I say, well, if that's the case, then maybe some of the rules or the regulations or this very tight leash that you're leaving them on isn't allowing them to make decisions on their own. And at the end of the day, they could leave at any moment, and then you don't really have an opportunity to help if there is a failure. Oftentimes we have these helicopter parents who don't want their kids to be hurt, and I get it. Like when my son or my daughter cry, it hurts my heart. Like I just want to fix it. But it's not the way for them to learn how to fix things themselves, how to have resiliency and bounce back. And so there, it is important to
and also make their own mistakes.
Yeah.
Make their own mistakes and learn from them. I think everybody has the right to make mistakes, I think, in life. And I think everybody has the right to do things I don't agree with. You know what I mean? It's that's the way it is. That's the way life is. Even if they're my kids, they still have the right to do things I don't think are right. Because they are autonomous human beings. And we've begun to talk about sort of societal impacts, and I think it is an important theme for you, because we talked about it before the show, and maybe we'll come into it. I mean, sort of, you're in the States. It's been a tough 4 years prior to the pandemic, and then the pandemic brought into really stark relief some of those fractures that exist and some of the things that you face as a culture and as a country. And there are some ways in which here in the UK we share them, and some ways in which it's very different. So what's that been like, as somebody who's more on the liberal scale of things, to have lived in a country which has been the opposite of liberal for a while, and where actually you would have been demonized because of your choices in life. You know, if that guy had got his way, you know.
It's been really tough. And the interesting, I believe the interesting thing is that I was raised Republican.
Yeah.
And I don't want to necessarily talk parties, because I don't believe it's about parties. It's
nothing to do with party politics.
Right.
Absolutely. It's about whether you're compassionate and human or not. And that's got nothing to do with party politics.
Right. It's nothing to do with politics. There has, but the preface for this, I'm prefacing what I'm about to talk about. But so they've done research, and at least in the States, people who vote a certain way have a certain mindset. They think a certain way. They see things a certain way. It's just a different set of glasses. Okay. Yeah. And I was raised with those glasses on. And I started to take those glasses off as I traveled, as I grew, as I learned more. And so I put on a different pair of glasses. And so I understand where both sides of the country is coming from. Unfortunately, it's very extreme. And in the last 4 years has been very, very hard. I won't lie. When we heard the election results, I cried for 2 weeks, I think, off and on. And I cried not for me, but for the trauma. I just thought of all my transgendered friends and allies out there. I thought of minorities. I just cried and cried and cried, because you and I both know that, you know, I heard a lot. It's just 4 years. We lived through all of them, you know, that we lived through every president. And I just kept saying, I will, but I know other people won't live through this. And so for me, it was very hard. You know, there's
like being a parent during that time, because
my kids are young enough that they didn't have a lot of understanding and knowledge of what was kind of going on. They knew that I would get upset. Sometimes I couldn't hide it, just talk about shielding. There's no reason to shield. I'd just be like, I'm upset. Something's happened. And, you know, we did say that, you know, Mom and I, we hope that we still have rights when this is all done. You know, and if it didn't, we were going to move to the UK. It was just like, it was very unsettling. And interestingly, after the election happened, I noticed within myself that I had really been on trauma high alert for 4 years. Every day when the news came up, it's like, what's happening? Oh my God, how am I going to cope with this? How am I going to deal with this? What can I do? You know, and then I would say to myself, well, my friends who are Black, they never get a day off. I can't take a day off. I have to keep educating myself, fighting. And it is absolutely exhausting. And so I realized at the switch of the presidents for our country that I wasn't on high trauma alert anymore, and that my cortisol response started to lower, and I wasn't on edge. And you know, for individuals, as you know, who are in kind of a state or a chaotic environment, when you get out of that, it sometimes feels very weird, and you feel like oh, this is odd. What is this? What is this? Because there's calm and you're not used to that. And so even in the calm, I've had this feels unusual. What's going on here? And so it definitely has impacted my parenting in some ways, just because of my mood and what I say.
I'm sort of, I mean, one of the things I think about the pandemic is that one of the gifts it gave us was making Trump lose the election. I think without the pandemic, he probably still would have won the election, to be honest. And I think it's a real gift. Sad to say that it took something like that to get rid of the nutter. But, you know, it did, because what became clear was how incompetent he is, apart from anything else. He couldn't organise piss up in a brewery, to be honest. That's a British saying. I don't know if you know the saying.
I've heard of it. It's very good. It's a good saying. You know, it was a very different leadership style. But
there was no leadership. It was nonsense.
No.
It was sort of charismatic bully boy narcissist bullshit, really. So
it was tough. It was very tough to live
through. But the sort of, I think one of the things about the pandemic, which is an emerging understanding and awakening of people about the impact of environments on us in terms of our mental health. And I think that I think it's going forwards with this experience, this cultural experience that's now shared, sort of a broader base of humanity now has experienced that. And will understand the conversation now. When we start having these conversations saying, well, you know, if you're in a frightening society, you will have mental health issues. Now that frightening society could be frightening because you're black and it's a white society that views you as bad. It could be frightening because you're gay and it's a straight society that views you as a risk, etc., etc. And I think it's, you know, there is a possibility now of a dialogue around that, an emotional dialogue where people can get it and understand, because they've just had this experience in the pandemic. At least I'm hopeful of that. I don't think I'm a bit Pollyanna, I have to say, because of how I survive life at times. But my experience is now people, because in psychology, what we've been saying to people for a long time is that you need to change the way you're doing your life to feel better. And I think there's an old-fashioned view of therapy, which is you go see a therapist, they cure you, they give you these magic things, and then you're fine. But it's not. I mean, most of what we do in therapy now is we do give people magic things that help, but also we teach people how to live healthier.
But it's a skill set. It's skills. It's life skills that are practical, hands-on. At every session when I work with a client, it's like, this is I need them to have something they can take away, something they can do, something they can work on. Yeah, absolutely.
But also I think, and this is coming back to some of the things that you talked right at the beginning, I was really touched by your rocks and your fairy gardens. And because I think for psychological health, genuine, we need to be changing the world for the better. We need to be actually engaging in a creative way with the world and seeing that we can have an effect on it.
Absolutely. And that's the biggest thing. That's like my inner drive is that I've been through some stuff in my life, and I just want people to know that, you know, I don't mind being vulnerable. I don't mind sharing my stuff because it just makes me stronger. But we have to come together. We have to work together. You know, I'm working on developing a TV show right now, and it's totally 100% based on when I took a step back and I thought, how could I help the most people, you know, with the masses, to communicate better, to live better, to learn how to do this. And so I came up with this TV show. I can't talk much about it, but it stars me, of course, and it'll be a lot of fun. But it's essentially modeling for people how can we communicate? How can we switch it up? And in a funny way, you know, in a way that can be relatable by somebody who also can say, yeah, I do things too that you can relate to. Nobody's perfect. And
I think that's really finding that connection that we have, because I think one of the, and again, I mean, I suppose I'm taking sort of I don't think it's Pollyanna. I think it's more of a Foucaultian approach to history and human development. I mean, I think there's I don't know if you know Foucault, French philosopher, but he sort of had this really interesting idea that sort of when somebody tries to impose on others power, automatically creates resistance, and resistance is automatic. It's a natural part of things, and the resistance tends to fracture and etc. power. I think Obama said it interestingly, said something about I Trump was inevitable given that I was elected. I mean, he didn't say those exact words.
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that was a very Foucaultian statement, and so the counterculture to Trump is inevitable. This sense in which people will have fractured into lines of resistance, which are very creative and human. One of the things about it is I think that it will, although it has appeared to create great divisions, I think it's actually also probably created a lot of opportunity for connection between people, because that happens.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It has polarized. This country is more polarized than I've ever remember it being, this or that. And so because of that, there has to be this coming together for the middle. I hear a lot, let's just stop fighting. Let's just stop. Yeah. Can we find some common ground? And there's always common ground to be found. That's the thing. We always can find common ground. And it's just finding a person. And, Kardashians aren't going to do it for us. Like, who is going to do it? Who's going to be the person to step up and say, listen, let's come together. Let's stop fighting. Let's put love out into the world.
Yeah.
If you put out what you get.
I think one of the things is that sort of in times of struggle, the common ground, I mean, and this, it's either into the herd or into the individual. The individual to protect themselves, fight, flight, freeze, very much organistic, individualistic, give me lots of guns, or it's into the herd. I'm safer in a group of people that look after me. And I hope we move more towards the herd. I've got indications, I think, that we are going back into that understanding that it's in our diversity and connection with each other. And I think where we can always find common ground is in understanding each other emotionally in our experience, emotional experience. And the people that can't do that because they're congenitally disordered, they have too much trauma, so they can't empathize, etc. Feel very sorry for them, but most people aren't in that camp, really.
Right.
And most people can, at some point, find a way of communicating emotionally. And I would guess, I don't know how you feel about this, but I would guess one of the things that we're going to see growth in, and maybe coming back to the beginning of the show, is the growth of the arts and the ability of the arts to bring people back together, because it's such a fundamental way of connecting emotionally.
Absolutely. So here's an interesting thing that I'll bring in to your point about connection. So my dissertation was looking at whether there were commonalities between personality traits of the big five and then the basic elements of music, rhythm, harmony, melody. Nothing small.
Fantastic.
Thanks. Of course, there's nothing out there, so I am like pulling from everything to try to figure out like the basics of how did language come, how did music develop, right? So hominoids, our early ancestors, right? When women and men were both bipedal and they could, the women, for lack of a better word, could resist unwanted sex from the men. The men in the tribe, the groups, couldn't, the alpha didn't take them all. So they had to actually start thinking of new ways to communicate and how to woo a spouse. And one of the ways they were doing it is through music and dance. And when I take a reflection back to look at all the singers, the dancers, the artists, they're not huge football players. We think about Prince, he was really little. Paul Simon, they're little, kind of usually little guys, but they never had a want for a partner, right? And then the other thing is when language started to develop with regards to words and sounds, we didn't necessarily have words at the beginning, but we had certain sounds that we knew were our tribe. So this tribe made this sound, doot, 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 and maybe that one went, ee. And if you heard ee too close, that meant that the tribe was coming. We have to get out of here. We have to move. They're not part of us. They're part of them. And so the development of language and music and dance and moving, because now we're not on 4 feet, we're on 2, we can move our arms. A lot of that has to do with community coming together. Who's your in group, who's not your in group. And so exactly what you say is it should happen. And in this, America loves sports. I love sports. That's fine. But you know, if we had the Queen's Scholarship over here, and for those who don't know, who are watching from the States, I believe that's where if you're talented in music, you can actually, you don't have to bust tables and then do your music gig at the same time. Because to survive here as a musician or an artist of any kind, if you don't have a parent or somebody floating you, you got to hustle, you got to work. There's no scholarship.
Yeah, I tell you what, the best place to go is France. You'll get a living wage.
Wow.
The state pays you if you're an artist in France.
Well, I'm going to pack my bags. I'll be back. I'm out.
Bethany, unfortunately, we've literally run out of time.
We're out of time.
Over,
oh my gosh.
I know. But what this indicates is that we need to have a follow-up show with you.
Yeah.
And continue, because we've only just scratched the surface, I think.
Yeah.
I sort of, it's been a real joy to talk to you and real joy to sort of promote what you're doing. If people want to get hold of you, what's the best way? Have you got a website?
I do. DrBethanyCook.com. BOCTOR, BethanyCook.com. I am all over social media, so TikTok, Twitter. If you want to see some of those rock videos or my neighbors singing and dancing in the rain to YMCA, dancing with their dogs, those are on TikTok. Facebook, I have a Facebook group. It's called A Perspective on Parenting, and I daily post stuff, a lot of interactions. People from around the world are part of that group, and it's just, we want to help everybody live healthier, better lives and learn how to communicate. It's my main goal.
I think what really strikes me about your approach is it's very, I mean this in the best possible way, it's very messy, real and human.
Thank you.
There's nothing perfectionist about it. It's absolutely achievable. And look, you know, you've got to know you're impressive coming from the background that you come from. It's been such a joy to have you on. I hope you'll be coming back to it. I definitely want you back. And if you can make the time,
I'll be back.
it'll be wonderful. Got to finish there, folks. I'm sorry, but if I go over the hour, I get told off by my team because we have to give these shows to other radio stations. And I'm sort of, I can hear James in the background going, "Shut up, Noel, stop." So I'll stop there and see you all. Bethany, you just stay with us. I'll see you all next week. Bye-bye.